Hello everyone. Welcome to our event. In this event, we will be essentially talking about opportunities that you have to be selected for the MLH fellowship as well as the Google Summer of Code. And we will have a special guest who is very well experienced in both of them. However, he will be focusing on the Google Summer of Code, and I myself will be focusing on the MLH fellowship. Now, to get started, I would like to introduce our guest and introduce our profiles as well.
Hello,
Hello,
everyone.
Param.
Hello,
Welcome.
Nathaly.
Would you like to talk about your profile?
Okay, I'm Param Siddharth. You might remember me from one of the past live streams that I did with Nathaly. I'm currently doing my Google Summer of Code. I know it might be surprising because it usually ends in 3 months, but my project is a little larger. I am a software developer, and I have also contributed to lots of open source software. I'm currently in the final year of my Bachelor of Technology degree, and I also make music. That's all about me.
Okay, that's awesome. In my case, this is I am an MLA fellow for the fall 2022 batch. I am a freelancer on Upwork, a top-rated freelancer. I work there as a software developer, and I am also an ambassador in computer science student. And even though Baran didn't mention it, we are both campus aspirants, and that's how we met. So without further ado, let's get started with the presentation. I'll give it to you, Baran.
Okay, so as the title says, we will talk about the selection process of the MLH Fellowship and the Google Summer of Code. If you look it up online, you will realize that the percentage of people who get selected from those who apply is usually very small for both programs. And most of the time, it's usually lack of awareness of those participating or applying, or sometimes even silly mistakes by them that leads to them getting rejected. In this in this presentation, we'll talk about ways in which you can increase your chances of getting selected, and um, with respect to both of the programs. So this is pretty much all that we have to go through in the presentation. After which we will move to the Q&A. We will introduce the programs to you, and we'll talk about the eligibility requirements to get yourself selected in the program.
Okay, now from here, we would like to talk a bit to have a context about what is MLH and the Google Summer of Code. MLH, as you can read, is essentially an alternative for the fellowship. It's an alternative for a normal internship, and the duration normally is of 12 weeks or 3 months, in which you can participate and work with international companies, normally major big brand companies that are doing wonderful things in touch, and you have mentors from those areas and from the MLH team that allows you to learn while you also get paid for those 3 months.
Okay, now I'll tell you something about Google Summer of Code. Unlike the MLH Fellowship, the Google Summer of Code program completely focuses on open source software. There's open source software in the MLH Fellowship as well, but in Google Summer of Code, all of the organizations participating and accepting participants are open source, are hosting their open source projects, and the participants propose projects for a cycle of around 3 months, but it can go as far as 6 months depending on the size of the project, as is the case with me. And Google offers them Google offers them a stipend based on the amount of contribution they make to the project. And it's a yearly program. It happens once every year. And in February, we get to know about the organizations that are available for participation.
Okay, now about the requirements for the MLH, you need to be over the age of 18. This is normally targeting university students and further. You need to be proficient in English. You need to be able to write it and speak, as you will be communicating with the companies in that language. Of course, async communication as well as having meetings with them, and they need to be able to understand you. You reside in a country not embargoed by the US, and you have to check the list that they have for this. You have access to a remote space with a stable internet. Again, you're expected to be meeting the mentors to collaborate on the projects, and it's expected of you that you have a space where that communication is fluid and possible. It's not affecting your performance. You need to be proficient in at least one programming language. They absolutely have preferences for certain languages according to the partners that are available, but we will talk about it later. And you need to be available for 30 hours a week for 3 months or 12 weeks.
Okay, so that's about the MLH fellowship. The requirements of getting selected in the Google Summer of Code program are you have to be at least 18 years old, which is same as the fellowship. That's usually the age at which you get into a university or which you are during the middle of your fresher year. You need to be eligible to work in the country that you're in. So the stipend that Google gives you is taxable, which is why uh, you need to have the permission to work professionally from the country that you're in. So that's a requirement. You have to be a beginner to open source. Now, the reason why they have this clause is because if you are an open source professional, then Google Summer of Code is not for you. It is only for you if you are a beginner and if you want to judge whether or not you are one. If you're currently in university and if you have been doing open source only for a few years, you probably are eligible as a beginner. You haven't participated in Google Summer of Code before. So before you shout at me saying, oh, I know people who have participated multiple times, let me tell you that this requirement is fairly new. And in the past couple of years and this year as well, people who participated in Google Summer of Code were allowed to participate again in the coming years. But that requirement has been lifted in favor of allowing people who are not university students to participate. So both the programs, the fellowship and Google Summer of Code, now accept participation from people who are either professionals or graduates, which is why now they require you to participate. Now Google Summer of Code requires you to participate only once. Obviously, the organizations behind both these fellowships, Major League Hacking and Google, are from the USA, which is why the country that you're in needs not to be embargoed by the USA.
And now we'll move to the Q&A questions. But before, we'll take a break for you guys, and we'll be back responding, answering those questions. See you soon. Okay, we're back with the questions. Now, first question. Normally, when I got started, the first question that came to my mind once I was able to pass the first stage, which was after the fourth time that I applied, was what will they ask in the technical interview? How can I know if I am prepared for the technical interview? Okay, for those who don't know, essentially you have around 4 to 3 steps to apply for the MLA fellowship as of now. The first will be you fill in a form. The second, if they like your profile, they will invite you to a general interview. And if you pass the general interview, they will invite you to a technical interview in which they will try to test out your technical knowledge, not with a coding sort of style. They won't verify to your ability to do DSA or algorithms. They will test your knowledge about a particular project that you submitted and know of, work on. Now, how to know if you are prepared and what will they normally ask? Regarding my experience, what they asked for me was first of all, why did you use this? I remember they asking why I use something for the SQL database. To give you a context, I submitted a web application that will giving an input, giving a video, the video of the training of a boxer. It will generate statistics according to the performance of that person. It used artificial intelligence as well as Django or web application development. And one of the aspects of the engineering part was using a database. And they asked, okay, why did you use this type of field, this type of, I don't remember the name now, for this particular field of the database, the attribute, the property, why did you use this type of value? Instead of using a test, why didn't you use a JSON? And you needed to answer what was your logic for it. So what you can expect is what's the logic behind the architecture that you use. That's quite common. Another example that I had was why are you documenting the code in this way? Or please explain to me for example, the Django application, they asked about the views file and what is this method doing? Now, how can I know if I am prepared for the technical question? I would suggest you go with a person, with a teammate or someone of your same level or maybe a senior, and try to explain the project to them. Especially they need to be a developer so that they can sort of focus on okay, what is your logic for using this type of architecture? What is your logic for using this programming language? Why use Django when you could have used Java or a framework for Java, a Spring Boot? Why not use native code? And you need to explain the advantages versus the disadvantages. Now, for the next question, what project should I submit for revision? I don't know if you had this in the Google Summer of Code.
No, I think it's only for the fellowship.
Okay, as I already told you, the first step for the fellowship was submitting the form. After it, you have the general interview, and then you have the technical interview. Now, in the first step, when you submit the form, one of the requirements is specifying a project that they can check, and this project needs to be public. Normally, a GitHub link or similar type of repository, just a place where they can check the code, right? What project should I submit? My advice, I have done this 4 times. So my advice is choose something that's complex. Um, I will not say truly complex, but something that does something, solve an issue that you believe a client would pay for. If someone can pay for it, try to find that type of project that does something that works and is useful in a sense. And at the same time, try not to choose something that will be at the level of an enterprise. And if you do, pick the files that are more relevant, the most relevant to the logic. Because what happens when you pick something that's truly basic, they cannot picture yourself working or making a contribution to a real work project that actually you will actually be working on. Remember that you will be working with partners, either GitHub, Solana, that have real repositories, and those projects are not simply printing or displaying a web page. So they need to envision yourself doing something related to it. And at the same time, if you pick something that's too complex or too advanced, they won't have the chance to understand all of it or all of the files that may not be relevant. Try to focus on the logic. If you have a big project, as it was my case, create a GIF or a folder with the relevant ones that truly represent the sort of the code that took you the most time to think of. And next question. For since I've been talking a lot, I will give it to you first.
Okay, thank you, Nathaly. So, to improve your chances of getting accepted, I will be giving a lot of advice after this question as well. So, to prevent repetition, I'll tell you something else. There are lots of organizations that come to the uh, Google Summer of Code again and again every year. Sometimes there are new organizations, sometimes there are old organizations, sometimes there are projects that are proposed by the organizations, and sometimes there are projects that are proposed freshly by the candidates. Some people start contributing in January, February, where the organizations are revealed, and some start contributing way before. Even for the fellowship, I think I and Nathaly have applied multiple times, and we got selected. I got selected after maybe the fifth try. Um, so, and I know people who got selected in their first try as well. So there is a difference. Sometimes people don't make it in their first try. The experience is very different for different people, and we are here only to share our perspective. So you need to find what works for you, and that is the best way to get selected. And we'll talk more about it.
As for me, something that truly improved my chances is being selected in other programs or maybe even conferences that had programs, conferences, applying or working with organizations that had that relevance. For example, the GitHub Campus Experts, um, scholarships with the Linux organization, trying to see, okay, if this person, if this particular program is not accepting me, let's try getting experience with similar items that will also give me more relevance or to my profile and strengthen my profile and give me also exposure. So that's my tip for it. Okay, let's continue with the last question.
Okay, that's me. So I'll tell you something about my contributions under Google Summer of Code, and then I'll tell you how to choose an organization to apply to. So I contributed to Metacall, which is a polyglot runtime, and it's a very low level project. I probably don't have enough expertise to contribute to the core, which is why I took the project that involved working with the DevOps aspect of the project, the build automation, the pipelines, and sometimes the Git repository automation as well. There are lots of organizations that come to Summer of Code very often. Some of them develop very popular software and also enterprise software, such as you'll notice lots of projects involving Dart and Flutter. You'll also notice some projects by big Linux organizations. And if you use open source software and if you build projects using those tools, you might be quite familiar with some of them. It's not limited to computer science or coding or software development. There are often organizations that come with machine learning ideas and projects, and some of them are even open to new proposals involving new technologies. For example, there are some organizations that come with projects related to Internet of Things and circuitry, electrical circuitry. So you can look to contribute to them as well if you're not from a computer science background. And sometimes there are fresh organizations that are looking to get selected. They often post their listings on Twitter or LinkedIn or GitHub um, prior to the Summer of Code actually even starting. If you contribute to a lot of open source, you will be connected to them through their Discord or Slack servers. And through those channels as well, you can keep yourself notified of new organizations coming into Google Summer of Code. When I was deciding which organization to choose, I looked at my stack. I looked at the competitiveness of every domain that we have, so that I can try and apply to a domain where we have less competition, so that I can increase my chances of getting selected. I usually I would say, keep 2 to 3 organizations and projects in your mind while applying, so that you have at least a few options in case you don't make it into the first organization or project in the first try. And how it starts off is with you submitting a project proposal. And I think you can submit up to 2 to 3 project proposals in the beginning and work on only one of them when it gets selected. Most of it is your communication with the organization and the mentors that gets you selected. um, and we'll get back on that. So that's how you choose an organization to apply to.
Okay, now which track to select for the fellowship? This will be a sure one. There are currently, I know that they're talking about a new track. However, let's talk about the 3 tracks that I believe are available at the moment. The first will be the open source fellowship track. Then you have the closed source or software engineering fellowship track. And you have the software reliability engineering, if I'm not mistaken, or SRE track. I already had my focus on software engineering, so my choice was split between the closed source versus the open source. When I talk to the team about those, the only difference between the two, at least relating to the core of the program, is that one is for your code to be public. The other, your code will not be available for others to see. It will not be public. And I believe they also mentioned that for the closed source, you're contributing or collaborating more closely with the people. As for the open source, you're taking issues and making those contributions in tasks or in those similar places. And I would say there it depends on what you want, since they are both so similar. If you want your work to be available for others and you want to share it, of course, the public or the open source option was best for me. Otherwise, if you don't really mind, pick any of the two. And the third for the software engineering for the software reliability part, or SRE. I don't have any comment since I don't have much experience with it. I believe, and let me know, Paran, what do you think? This is more related to people who are interested in the performance operations, um, sort of the after development and Docker containers um, path, and not necessarily developing features in the process or in making those contributions that will bring functionality to the core project. So yeah. Okay. Paran, do you have any thoughts on the last track? This is
um,
Lilac.
the new one that we have, oh, that one.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it involves mostly DevOps. and kind of related to the project that I'm working on right now, which is automating the build, integration, and deployment processes of the application. It doesn't have to be a typical software application, it may also be a machine learning based pipeline. And that's what I think the last track focuses on.
And one last comment before we move on to the next question. It could also depend on your preferences regarding the partners. I know that Meta, or which was Facebook in the past, is more focused on software engineering with reliability, DevOps related. So that track will mostly apply to you if you like the idea of working with them. And I believe Google, the last partner that they had for this batch as well, was mostly interested in XRE. So if that's your preference regarding the partners, you can go with it as well.
Okay. So there are different times where you can start contributing to an organization after getting selected. For some people, it's after they make a decision when the exposure window opens in January to February, when the final list of organizations is revealed for the Summer of Code. Sometimes you can roll back to the archives and see which organizations participated last year. And based on your statistical skills, you can estimate which organizations are going to participate again and start contributing to them as soon as possible so that you increase your chances of getting selected. Now, how exactly do you start contributing to the organization? If you go to some projects within the organization, you will realize the documentation or the README files might contain some links to their social media channels where they communicate with each other. It's usually a Discord server or a Slack server, which you can join and you can communicate with them. Some of them also prefer using platforms like Gitter and Matrix and Telegram for communication. It's really more to do with how big that organization is and how much they want to talk about it. So you can participate in their ongoing communication. I think if you're able to get a one-on-one communication going on with any of the existing contributors, which might be potential mentors, you would want to tell them that you aspire to apply to the organization as a Google Summer of Code contributor. And based on that, uh, they'll help you contribute to the organization in a way that increases your chances of having your proposal selected in Google Summer of Code. In reality, the proposal is selected by the mentors themselves. So you may as well start working on the project idea. Maybe you can build a model or design of what you're going to do, even if you're not proficient in that technology yet. And once you have the mentor's approval, you pretty much have Google's approval as well. And you can start contributing from as far as 1 year and as less as a few weeks to the project. But keep in mind that if you start contributing too late, that may that may mean that someone else might get selected in your position. So you need to be quite active in those regards, and keep your eyes open on social media, because if any project is actively looking for fresh contributions and that organization may or may not be in Google Summer of Code, they usually post that on their social media. um, so keep that in mind. Okay, that's another one for me.
Yeah.
So to decide the project that you should propose, you need to look at the technologies that the organization is working with. If you go to any organization's page on the Summer of Code website, you will see a list of programming languages and slash or technologies that they are looking to have contributions for. If the list hasn't been released yet, you can go to the archive and look at the technologies that were worked on previously by that organization. So once you have a good idea of what the applications made by the organization are and how you can extend those, whether by using those technologies or by adding some new technologies, um, you can draft your own proposal, or you can pick up an idea from their project list if they have any. I can give you an example of a person which contributed to a very low level project, but the project idea was completely related to Flutter, which is a mobile app framework. So after browsing the organization GitHub for a while, he realized that that it would be great if they have a mobile application accompany their backend server, which they currently don't have. And since that person had sufficient skills to create a Flutter application for them, um, he wrote a proposal for the Flutter application, got it reviewed by the mentors before submitting it, and then finally got it selected. So I think with the new and modern frameworks coming up, many of the existing organizations are also looking to migrate their projects. And there are also lots of issues on their existing GitHub repositories that you can look at to find things that you can contribute to. Sometimes there are roadmaps mentioned within the issues, which means there uh, are potentially lots of contributions that you can make to that project. So that's how you can decide which project to propose. And in the worst situation, if you have no idea what project to choose, you can move on to talk directly to the mentor and ask them how you can contribute. And I'm pretty sure they'll help you out just like they helped me out. Okay, what happens once my proposal gets selected? So since you contributed very actively to the project to get your proposal selected, to the organization to get your proposal selected, and you were constantly in touch with the mentors, and now you're finally into Google Summer of Code, it's time to celebrate. You have posted it on all your social media. Now what? You might think that once you get selected, you immediately start contributing, but it's not like that. You get a window of around 3 months to just communicate with the community. It's called the bonding period, in which you talk to your mentors, take your time to understand the project better, and only after that do you actually start working on the project that you have chosen. That's the reason why many proposals often include ideas and technologies that you may not be proficient in. For example, there's Harsh. I know him from before, and he contributed to Metacall last year. And the project he proposed was building a Jupyter kernel. Now, building a Jupyter kernel is not something a software developer does in their everyday life. So, how on earth did he get the idea? He browsed the project, understood how it works, and discovered the fact that adding a Jupyter kernel to it would be a great addition to the project. Also, he was very intelligent. He knew that he has 3 months of time just to prepare himself to learn the technologies needed to build the project, which is why it was not a big deal if you throw in some words and technologies in the proposal that you still don't know about. And overall, we know that it's a student program, it's supposed to be a learning experience for you, which is why you don't have to know everything beforehand if you to start contributing to the organization. This is true for open source in general, not just Google Summer of Code, but it's very relevant with respect to the project. After the 3 months finish, your contribution actually starts, and once your contribution starts, it's usually a few more months. I can't give you a single number related to that because it keeps on changing, and with the introduction of the new Summer of Code pattern, the projects can go as far as 6 months and beyond. So after that, you basically just contribute. The project may be 300 hours, 150 hours, 750 hours, depending on how big it is. And if you have any changes in the size of the project in the middle of the project, and if you want to change the deadlines, you can still communicate with the mentors, and they have a channel directly with the Google folks, and they can adjust your deadlines with respect to that.
Okay, this section in particular is, as we mentioned before, each program pays the participants for being part of the program. And this is not meant to be a salary or the replacement of a full-time job, as they state. This is just meant to help you with your expenses, for example, given the fact that many of us are college students or university students, to help us continue with our expenses and get something from the program while we work with them and help them. So I'll give it to Paran to talk about what they are specifically, maybe something short for those who don't know. However, I'll be focusing on one question that I had when I was thinking about getting the stipend, and that will be what happens when I don't have how will they pay me if I don't have a bank account in the United States or in Europe? How will I get paid? Will they select me if I, for example, am from a country like Venezuela, where many of us do not have them? Or maybe if it's just you in any country, how do you get paid if you don't have a bank account? How is the process? Can I be eligible? They use a system, at least for the fellowship, the MLH, that works with several providers and several platforms that by themselves are also working with any type of bank that you can imagine. One option will be PayPal. You don't necessarily need to have a bank account in dollars that's located in the United States to have PayPal, and they also have Pioneer, which as of now can also, as far as I know, connect to Venezuelan banks. And they have several options that only ask you to have the sort of the balance. In short, um, even if you don't have PayPal or similar platforms, you have the opportunity to create those. It's not as hard as you may think, and it's not necessary for you to have a US bank account. So I'll give it to Pan.
Thank you, Nathaly. So there were a couple of questions. Uh, Let me quickly answer this that I had before registering myself on the platforms for the stipends in Summer of Code. So Summer of Code primarily uses Payoneer for all the payments, unlike MLH, which uses Tipalti, and both of them have some different requirements. Payoneer essentially is a service that allows you to get yourself a US bank account in which you can receive US dollars, and it will regularly automatically convert it into your country's currency, in my case, Indian rupees, um, on a rolling basis. And it does some verifications for you so that it can handle all the formalities of yours on its own behalf. Platforms like Wise, Payoneer, and Tipalti are known to have the least conversion cut from one currency to another, especially from the US dollar. So that's to your benefit. As for the stipends, they have a certain amount which varies depending on the size of your project, I think. And it also depends on the purchasing power parity of your country, um, due to which it may be quite low in one country and quite high in another. Um, in my country, it can range from 1,000 to 4,000 US dollars for the entire summer of code, and they pay it in a 45% 55% basis, which means when you're halfway through the program, they pay you 45%, and when you're done with it, they pay you the rest 55%. The income you get from the fellowship or summer of code is supposed to be used by you for your living expenses during your contribution to them. And as Nathaly mentioned, the summer of code stipend also doesn't have to completely function as a full-time salary. And to answer the question in the comments, yes, the stipend is still taxable if it goes beyond the exemption limit of your country. It's not a gift, unfortunately. I wish it was. There might be some countries which don't consider educational stipends um, as taxable, but I think most countries do. So, yes, they're definitely taxable.
Okay, the last question. How helpful are the programmers in Venezuela and India? This is quite a subjective question, quite personal, right? Um, I feel that in some countries, um, we get as programmers or as such people the opportunity to solve or contribute to solving certain issues, especially those social issues, with our abilities. And in some countries as well, such as Venezuela, it's hard for students to find a job without having certain degrees. And if they do have, for example, a master's or a bachelor's degree, because there's that sort of discrimination regardless of your skill set, then maybe the payment is not as you like it, or maybe you don't have as much opportunities to get to work on your skill set. So I feel that these programs, before I talk about the importance of programmers in Venezuela, these programs allows you to build your skill set, work with companies like GitHub, like Facebook or Meta in the past, Solana, that are leading. They are technically the best of the best, and they're giving you the top standards while you're working with them. And they are also paying you or helping you with your expenses. So going back to how helpful are the programmers in Venezuela? It depends on what the programmers are doing. However, I will say that for those programmers that are able to move the future of the country forward, by either I've seen programmers that, for example, they will try to improve how efficient a public space is or the public services that some companies provide, and they will help speed up the infrastructure that's maybe not working ideally in those spaces. So we have without many tools, without, for example, hammer, just a computer and internet connection, the possibility of giving, mm, for one thing, improving the operational experience in the country, making things more efficient, with coding. And even if we're not doing coding, even if we're not using coding, we still have the logic or the mindset of a software engineer, a developer, who will find patterns in things, try to improve those patterns, and try to reproduce, either to automate or to check the deficiencies of those. So that's why I guess Farah and I have been taking the initiative to talk about these programs that are not as popular in Venezuela. I know in India it's so. Farah,
No.
I'll give it to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nathalie. In India, the emphasis in terms of technical programs and engineering decisions goes in a different direction in India, because most people who enter the domain of engineering don't do it by choice. It's more of an academic hype that has been created in the past 10 years due to a few engineers getting very high paying jobs, and India being a poor country, a developing economy, which is why every family wants their kids to be stable, which is why they recommend their kids to get into engineering. Oftentimes, it turns out not to be the best decision for them, but you do realize that you don't have to be the best at something to make something out of it, or to get a job in it. The traditional way of getting hired in India is through campus placements in the universities. But with time, we are noticing a paradigm shift, and people are genuinely trying to get remote jobs, like me, for example, and they are using social media to reach potential recruiters and to get themselves noticed. Now, Google Summer of Code actually carries a lot of value in terms of your engineering experience, and is also a spark on your resume, which is why participating in open source can actually be beneficial to you career wise as well. You might think open source doesn't really pay because open source is supposed to be free. But contributing to open source is the best way to improve your skills while working on a real world project, as well as to get yourself noticed by potential recruiters, even big and great companies that host open source projects as well. For example, contributing to projects that are hosted by Google and are open source can it doesn't guarantee you a job in Google, but it can increase your chances of getting into Google. Um, and my advice to all people in India would be, do it for the skills, do it for the experience, not for the money, not for the popularity, and definitely not for the hype. Because if you don't think this is the right thing for you, it probably is not. If you are a DevRel enthusiast and you want to go into DevRel and community management, you should definitely go for it, and you should always prioritize your choices before others' advice. If you're into software development and if you like a particular framework and everyone keeps telling you, oh, it's not that famous, then you probably should keep all advices in your mind while still making your choice in terms of the technologies that you will be studying. You should keep the return on investment in mind while participating in any programs or learning any new technologies. um, I know Raheel from Pakistan, who learned Vue and built projects in Vue way before people in India or other places even knew that much about Vue. Today, Vue has risen to heights where it is being preferred to React for many big projects worldwide, including the one that Nathaly is working on right now. And it's quite powerful. It's exceeding the expectations of competitiveness with React, but no one could have told that a few years ago. The same goes for Golang. Go used to be a very less popular programming language, but now its usage is growing constantly, and we see more and more open source projects, especially in cloud native, pertaining to Go. So I definitely recommend you to participate in Summer of Code and the fellowship, and keep in mind all the possibilities and challenges in doing that. Don't be under motivated by the competition, and keep trying without giving up. You will succeed.
Awesome, Paran. I think we have reached the end of this live event, and we had some comments in the, at least in YouTube. I went over it and already responded, but if you want to, you can. So for now, we will be ending this session, guys, and we hope to see you soon, as we will probably, highly likely, most surely be collaborating again.
Hmm. Yes,
So
definitely.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.